We got one more guest, one more segment here for this Tuesday, October 1st edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is with professional handicapper Rolf Michaels from WagerTalk.com. Rolf, how's it going today, man?
Doing great, Adam. Appreciate being on, and just another week of football.
Yes, sir. Just another week of football. I guess before we talk about that real quick, I know you mentioned on last week's show that you've been working on your college basketball preparations. How's that going so far?
You know, I didn't get that much done this week. There were a couple football projects that I did, and, you know, as you're handicapping football, that's still the priority for myself and my customers. So basketball gets tweaked in as the schedule allows, but I'm finding myself scheduling more and more hours during the week towards it. So not much project in college basketball this past week, but the next few nights will certainly be all college hoops.
Well, and not to go off down a rabbit hole or anything like that, but NHL starts tomorrow. NBA, I don't even know when the hell the NBA starts, but that's coming up here too. College basketball is a little over a month away. You still have the NFL and college football throughout that time. And if you do stuff like soccer, tennis, golf, NASCAR, all the stuff we cover at BangTheBook.com, that's all still going on too. There just aren't enough hours in the day, man.
There isn't, and you got to prioritize. I mean, you know, buyer beware for someone who does every sport because, you know, I found you can't do every sport well. So, you know, obviously the NFL needs the least work because it has the fewest teams. It's easy to get information. You know, there's not a story anyone can find out any bit of information in the NFL by reading a local beat writer's papers. Well, in college football, that's so much different because of 130 teams and conferences like the Sun Belt. And, you know, that's basically why college basketball is my favorite sport. 353 teams, hidden value, situations and matchups that you don't find in other sports. So, you know, I think you prioritize. And clearly with me, it's, you know, college hoops, college football, and then NFL's 3. And, you know, baseball, I'll throw out a baseball play there as I look. I'm not a huge baseball fan. We've talked about that. But, you know, I still do the first pitch every day, and that keeps me invested in baseball. And the NBA, you know, I'll start doing my NBA stat sheet, which I find invaluable, you know, a couple weeks into the season as it's only looking at a 14-day span. And to me, there is a lot of value in the NBA if you're cherry picking certain situations. We have such a preconceived notion that, you know, the Lakers with LeBron and Golden State, these teams that are so good, but every team in the NBA goes through a losing streak. And when you could find out the spots to play against those teams, again, I think there's times you could find value.
Yeah, for sure. And once we get to the college basketball season, we'll do a lot of college basketball stuff with Rolf here on the segments. But, you know, for right now, we'll keep doing college football and the NFL. And speaking of college football, you know, I just mentioned we're about a quarter of the way through the NFL season. It's a little more than that in the college football season for a lot of these teams here. You know, we do have the 2 bye weeks speckled throughout the year this year for all the teams. But, you know, we're into week 6 now, and I'm sure that you, like I, made a lot of power ratings adjustments from last week. So what were some of the biggest movers for you, whether they were up or down?
Well, I can tell you this. Since the start of the year, I just tweeted this yesterday, in fact. Since the start of the year, my biggest up moves have been SMU. I've gone up 10 points. Ohio State, I've gone up 10 points. Louisiana Lafayette, I've gone up 9. And Coastal Carolina, I've gone up 6.5. And Coastal Carolina even caught me by surprise because I haven't had a play on them and I haven't had a play against them. So I had to go back and look at their season as it progressed to see, you know, why do I have them up so much? And again, I'm learning too. It's October 1st. I'm going through college football teams that I haven't used and looking at their year-to-date schedule and how it's progressed. The teams that I've gone down the most, there's 3 teams that I've dropped 7.5 points. Akron, Tennessee, and Virginia Tech. I've dropped FIU and UMass 6.5 points. And Georgia Tech, South Carolina, and Stanford have all fallen by 6 points for my opening power ratings in August.
Well, and again, I mean, this isn't just a case now at this point in the year where you get a one-off performance or something like that. We're figuring out who these teams actually are. And we're seeing a lot more expected outcomes from these teams. So, this is the time of the year where if you've been slow to react, it's probably a good idea to maybe over-adjust to the point where you're kind of falling in line with where you should have been. And I've done that with a few teams here this week. I adjusted Maryland down quite a bit. Purdue, obviously, with all their injuries, they got a massive adjustment from me. And judging by the line out there in the market, I still didn't adjust them down enough. But, at this time of the year, again, we've got an idea of what we're working with here, a much better idea than we did. So if you feel like you're still missing the market on some of these teams, it's a good time to really make that big adjustment.
It is, and, I'm just going to point out a couple things, and not that I'm promoting anything that I have on my site, but, one thing that I do with my power ratings is I sort them by conference from top to bottom. So if you print out my power ratings, which I update every Sunday, you have a home field edge on there, and then you have my beginnings and each week's changes, and then by conference. The other thing, if you're ever going to wager talking to my page, I started last week, and I'll be doing it every week. I do a college football stat sheet. So I have the strength of schedule. Everyone knows where an offense and a defense is, but I have points per game diff, and then the offensive and defensive rankings, yards per game diff, and the offense and defensive ranking, and yards per game diff with the offensive defensive ranking, and then plays per game. And we'll talk about those numbers as we're going through games, but at a glance, it's very important to know that this team played this number schedule and they're this yards per play versus a team that played this schedule and they're plus or minus this yards per play. It's a great perspective because a lot of times we forget a team that played a very difficult schedule early compared to a team, like Baylor that played 3 cupcakes to start the season.
Yeah, that's really important. We talk about strength of schedule. We talk about it a lot in college basketball, and I'm definitely looking forward to those segments here as we go forward. But, that is important too. And the yards per play thing is also very important because you get these games where teams do get outgained badly or where a team outgains the opposition badly. Like people were talking about it in the context of Jared Goff last week. Yeah, Goff threw for 500 yards or whatever, but he had less than 8 yards per attempt, which is below the league average. So, yeah, he threw for this big number, but it's not like he was super efficient. And we will have this throughout the year here where, teams got a big lead, they get outgained because they gave up a bunch of garbage time yardage, or the option teams are just on the field forever. We saw that last week with Memphis and Navy where Memphis just didn't have the football for long, but had a ton of yards per play when they did. So those are very important distinctions because, at this time of the year, this market tightens up, and it's those outliers on either side of the coin that can lead to getting some line value and also, having a good evaluation for these teams.
And again, I also include the number of plays per game on offense and defense. It's so important that when you're looking at a team that you're talking about only puts up 24 points and 350 yards. Well, if they're only averaging 60 plays a game, that's quite a bit different than a team when you're comparing that is on the field for 80 plays a game. So you have to make that comparison as well. Yards per play does that for you. But then when you're looking at totals, you need to know how many plays per game the team averages on offense. And when you're looking at a defense, look how tired or worn out a defense can get if they're on the field for that many more plays than an opponent.
Now, something I think I forgot to talk about with you last week, and we'll touch on this, and we'll get into some game breakdowns here. I had a listener reach out to me about revenge, and in particular here, especially now that we're in conference play, revenge where a team lost as a double-digit favorite. And that's something that they're looking to track here for this season. How much does revenge matter to you during conference play?
Well, I look at it, but there's no numbers that I have that say, wow, I'm going to play this. The biggest revenge situations I have are if you lost, if it was your only home loss, I think that's a big deal. I think lone home loss revenge is something that sticks out because a team was a winning team. A team had the mentality that they're going to win games at home and they have to protect their home field, and they lose that game. If you are a double-digit favorite, I will give you a check mark in the intangible category that you lost that game as a double-digit favorite. But I'm glad you brought that up because revenge is the most overused term in sports handicapping. Because if you were a dog and you were expected to lose and you lost that game, well, bullshit. You don't have revenge. You were expected to lose. The other team was better than you. You don't have revenge. You have a situation that you were a worse team and you're playing again the next year. So wholeheartedly, I think overrange is overused. But in certain spots, college basketball is one where if you lose, because you're playing that team twice in a season, if you lose as a home, as a favorite in the first meeting, I certainly jump on that team the second meeting. But in football, again, you're waiting from one year to the next, and the dynamic changes so much.
Well, I guess that's a good segue into this first game that we're going to talk about here, where Texas goes on the road to take on West Virginia. Game 317-318. Texas, an 11.5-point favorite. That's kind of the consensus number out there. There are some 11s. There is a 12 out there as well. This is a revenge spot for Texas, who lost at home last year, 42-41 to the Mountaineers. But I don't know, man. They got Oklahoma on deck. I worry about their ability to get margin here.
I agree with you. And let's talk about those numbers that I mentioned. Texas has played the number 21 schedule. And when I do strength of schedule, I use Sagarin's numbers because I like that Sagarin uses the FCS games and includes those. So early in the year, you had a team like UAB who actually was the number 250 strength of schedule because 120 FCS teams played more difficult schedules. So I like Sagarin's numbers because the bottom tier that played a lot of weak teams and played FCS foes, you actually have a strength of schedule number below 130. So it gives you a perspective of how low of a schedule they played. But Texas has played the number 21 schedule versus West Virginia's number 42. Texas is plus 16 points per game, West Virginia minus 0.5. Texas plus 0.7, West Virginia minus 0.5. So there's a 1.2 yards per play difference, not that much. Yards per game, Texas plus 61, West Virginia minus 48. So about 100 yards per game diff. Well, 100 yards per game diff does not call for a 11.5-point road favorite in this situation. And yes, Texas has revenge, but they were a 2-point favorite. Both teams were ranked in the top 15. It's a situation where you did not lose to an unranked foe that wasn't any good. It's hard to imagine West Virginia was that good at some point last year to where they are now. But, I look at Texas, and I agree with you. This is a team last year that got outgained on the season. This is a team last year, even with Ellinger having the stats he has, they were outgained by 17 yards per game on the road. This is a team that has played one game away from home, and that's about as little as a road disadvantage as you can have playing in the Houston, Texas Stadium against Rice, where you had the majority of the crowd. So, I'm not a West Virginia fan. My power ratings actually have this at Texas minus 6. Now, again, I was a little lower on Texas and Stanford at the start of the year than some people because, again, they were 9 and 10 win teams that got outgained. But Ellinger, even with his 15-1 ratio, did beat Oklahoma State, scored 40 against La Tech and scored 48 against Rice, but the yards per game diffs were not there. I mean, against La Tech at home, they only had a 41-yard edge. So I do lean with West Virginia here, plus the points.
Now, in my power ratings, I've got this game Texas minus 13.5. So it makes me wonder if I've improperly rated one or both of these teams, or if some of these situational elements were already factored in. As you mentioned, first real legitimate road game for Texas. And we know Morgantown's a very, very tough place to play, especially for Big 12 teams with that long trip. It's not easy to get to. It's up in the Appalachian Mountains. It's just not an easy road trip for anybody. Also, that Oklahoma game on deck. So this is why, when you look at power ratings, they're one part of the handicap. I find myself wondering if I don't have one of these two teams rated correctly or both of them, but I still want to go against my numbers and take West Virginia here because of the situational spot. So I don't know why my power rating is higher on this game, but sometimes it's just not going to matter at this time of the year when you start factoring in everything else that goes into the process.
Well, yeah, especially if you have some injuries. We're not talking quarterbacks injured here, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. But, you know, I am a believer that those first road games are tough. And, you know, it's a difficult situation that Texas last year, you know, their only road games, they opened up against Maryland, they lost. They went to Kansas State, they won by 5. They went to Oklahoma State and lost. They went to Texas Tech, and yes, they won, but they got outgained by 126 yards. And then they went to Kansas, and they had 297 yards and only scored 24 points. So, you know, looking at what they did last year at home, on the road, and now this being the first true road game is certainly a situation you have to keep in mind when you are handicapping the game.
All right, so we moved on to game 349, 350 here, and this is Cal and Oregon, a game you teased on Twitter, and I greatly appreciate that, getting a little bit of buzz about this segment. Oregon's a 17.5 or an 18-point favorite, and I'm going to throw a bad pun out there for everybody. It is October now, so, you know, Halloween coming up this month. California going with the Modster mash at quarterback there in Devin Modster by default because they have to, but how much of an impact does that have in your handicap of this game?
Well, you know, I had to look up. I didn't know what Monster did. You know, I didn't realize off the top of my head, you know, oh, yeah, he was a UCLA transfer, played 4 or 5 games in UCLA in 2017. Josh Rosen got injured. He had to start 2 games and did very well in those starts. Went to Utah, didn't throw much, was 8 of 12 for 103 yards, 1 touchdown, no interception. Against Cal, he was 14 of 18. Started the bowl game against Kansas State. The kid was 51 of 79 for 670 yards, completed 65%, and had a 4.0 ratio. Well, if I am Justin Wilcox, and I know I have an experienced quarterback that has started games with a top 15 defense, then I feel pretty comfortable. He knows your system, and he's been here. You know, this is a Cal team that we know isn't going to move the ball that much. You know, yeah, they put up 433 yards. They had some big plays in that Mississippi win, but this team is still averaging 346 yards per game. And last week in the first game when Garbers got hurt, they only had 245 yards against Arizona State. You know, this is when I'm looking at my stat sheet, that it's very nice to be able to compare numbers because Cal has played the 26 schedule and Oregon has played the 28. So year to date, looking at the strength of schedule, these teams have played exact like opponents. Well, Oregon is plus 28 points per game. Cal is plus 4. That's a 20-point difference. Oregon is plus 2.7 yards per play. Cal 0.2, so a 2.5 difference. Oregon plus 196, Cal minus 20 yards, a 216-yard difference. So does that necessitate an 18-point line? Well, I think the line probably would have been closer to 16. I think we probably have a 2-point adjustment here with Modster in. My power rating number, though, is 19. Again, another number that caught me by surprise. But, you know, I look at what Oregon's done. You know, the Auburn game, I made no adjustment after that. The Nevada game off a loss, they win 77-6. The Montana game, yeah, they only, I'm going to put that in quotations, won 35-3, but they had a 318-yard edge. What else do you want to do against Montana? And then you go to Stanford, and the offense struggles a little bit, but we know Oregon in that matchup against Stanford never puts up a ton of yards, and they win the game 21-6. So, you know, I look at it and I say, I know Oregon is going to score 30 points at home in my mind. So do I think Cal can get 12 points? Well, I do. So then you start looking if do I think Oregon can score more than that against Cal's defense? And I do. Cal did give up 525 yards at Mississippi. You know, Justin Herbert is a quarterback that is, you know, wasn't in the talk again. I mean, after last year, and he dropped down with the season he had, but he's completing 74% with a 14.0 ratio. I probably would lean Cal. It's not going to make my card. It's one of the games that is a complete toss-up to me. The Bears are 6-1 ATS as a dog. The Bears have covered 8 of 9 on the road because you have a defensive dog that doesn't make mistakes. But there's something about this Oregon team that I just feel they're starting to click. It's something special. You know, they did put up 42 points at Cal last year, although they allowed 427. But going back and forth in the game, I think Oregon can get to 35 plus, and I don't know if Cal can get to 17.
So we got a game here by listener request, game 353, 354, Tulsa and SMU. Again, not a game that a lot of people are going to be talking about, but SMU now in the top 25, first time in a very long time for them. And this line is moving against them a little bit here, although we've got pretty much 13 across the board. It kind of bounces around a little bit between 11 and 14 at some places out there. But the fact remains here that you've got an SMU team that's been much, much better than anticipated. I thought I was actually a little bit higher than the market on them coming into the season. Come to find out, I probably haven't been. And like you, I've been adjusting them up because they've been so impressive here thus far. What about them this week, though, where now they're ranked and now they're taking on a Tulsa team that, you become the hunted instead of the hunter once you're in the top 25 in one of these group of fives.
You're not going to say you are now the Kyle Hunter?
No. That's a good one, though.
I figured, you with your puns. So a couple things I tweeted. Here's one that says fade SMU, and then I'm going to tell you one that says play SMU. And you're always going to find positives and negatives on each game, and that's what you have to do. You have to weigh the positives and the negatives. This is just from this year. I didn't go back multiple years. But teams that popped up into the AP top 25 after week 1 have now gone 1-8 against the spread after they appeared. Boise State appeared in week 2 after the Florida State win and then failed to cover against Marshall. Maryland, USC, and Virginia popped up in week 3. They all failed to cover at Temple, at BYU, and Virginia against Florida State. In week 4, Cal, Arizona, and TCU popped up. Well, Cal did beat Ole Miss. Arizona State lost to Colorado. TCU lost to SMU. Last week, Kansas State popped up into the top 25. They failed to cover against Oklahoma State. This week, Oklahoma State and SMU are those first-time top 25 people that, as you said, not only do you have a bullseye on your back, I don't care how well you are, how well coached you are as a team. When you appear in that AP top 25, these kids are walking around campus like big shit. They know they are a ranked team. They know they are legit. And it's Sonny Dykes' job to keep them under control and keep them level-headed. But for an SMU, it's a huge deal. I would have played against. I did not play the game last week, but I would have played against SMU last week going to USF. I was on SMU against TCU. They win that game. That was a historic update against an in-state rival, Big Brother, that has crushed you recently. And what do? Wow, they go into USF and put up 497 yards, 31 first downs, and 10 sacks. We don't talk about the SMU defense, but they're allowing 3.6 yards per carry. They're only allowing 57% completions. They have 25 sacks. And this is the part that backs SMU. I love matchups between quarterbacks and wide receivers and D-lines against O-lines. SMU, number 1 in college football with 25 sacks. Tulsa, number 122, allowing over 4 sacks per game. Tulsa at home in their last game against Wyoming got sacked 7 times. So I think that SMU D-line is going to do a number on Tulsa. But with that said, SMU in that situation, they know they have a big game against Temple on deck. You're off those back-to-back road games. You're in the AP top 25. I lean under in this game. I think the D-line matchups plays well. And, no one stops Shane Bussell except himself. 69%, the Texas transfer, 10 touchdowns. But even having the leads he's had in 3 of the 4 games, He still has 5 interceptions. That's a bit of a concern to me.
My power ratings have this one SMU minus 14.5. And that's the thing about a game like last week. And this was something we talked about on yesterday's show with regards to Cincinnati. I think some of these games just fly way too far under the radar with how impressive they actually are. If you're in a bad spot, and, SMU was in a very bad spot off that TCU win, and they still went on the road and took care of business. Now they're in the top 25 for the first time since 1986. You've got a Cincinnati team on the road at Marshall. Yeah, they're a short favorite. But to win that game in such dominant fashion as they did with UCF on deck, that says a lot about where that football team currently is. So I actually like SMU a little bit here in this spot. Again, as you mentioned, the chance of generating a lot of negative plays with those sacks is a very strong angle to consider here for this game. But I think that, when you've got a team that is in a role that looks challenging and they just go out there and they pay no mind to it whatsoever, those types of things stand out to me. And Chad Morris built the talent for this program, and obviously we see what Chad Morris is doing at Arkansas, but he built the talent for this program. And now Sonny Dykes, the guy that's been around a long time, I think he's got a good pulse on this team. I'm not as worried about it as it sounds like you are and as it sounds like some people could be, and I may regret it. But even with the very small overlay here, I may end up with an SMU ticket this week.
Yeah, again, my power rating's 9.5. Now, maybe I had SMU way too low. I told you I moved SMU up 10 points. So, I would have had this game pick 'em at the beginning of the year. So clearly, SMU deserves to be it. And I agree with you. I'm a Sonny Dykes fan. I was a Sonny Dykes fan back at La Tech. He was dealt a tough card in California, but this is an experienced coach. And, I will say this, we didn't talk about this game, but, when SMU beat TCU 2 weeks ago, and part of the reason I was on SMU was that Sonny Dykes, the year before he came to SMU, was the TCU offensive analyst, and he changed their offense, and he knew exactly what TCU was going to do against SMU. He was there in 2017 and then took over SMU after that. So it's a situation where coaching clearly, he gets an extra asterisk mark here because a seasoned veteran that's been with good teams that have covered a lot, have been with bad teams with Cal when they struggled, and that's the type of coach you want that can say, listen, boys, I've been here, I'm experienced at this, let's keep your head focused, versus, let's say, a first-year head coach who's new to the program or new to Power 5 or even FBS football as a head coach.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction and an excellent point, because a lot of times you get these group of 5 teams that are on an upswing with an upstart head coach, a guy who's going to bail in a couple of years or after the season for a Power 5 job. And maybe Sonny Dykes gets another look for one, but there is a big difference between being a young head coach with an up-and-coming program and an established head coach that's either maximizing talent or taking that influx of talent from the previous guy and really taking that program to the next level. So that is an important distinction, and I think that there probably will be some talk of group of 5 trends of teams that get into the top 25 and stuff like that. But that is an important distinction to make, is that sometimes it's Jeff Brom, sometimes it's Sonny Dykes. And the difference between the two is pretty significant when you consider, grounding a team and keeping a team level-headed now that they're in the top 25. So that's an important distinction to make, and something that, will be in play over the course of the season here. You'll have group of 5 teams that pop into the top 25. Some may have those hot shot up and coming head coaches. Some may have veteran head coaches. I think there's more staying power for the veteran guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's not also forget, you also have a veteran junior quarterback in Shane Buechele, who was 3 years at Texas. So you have a guy who made 19 starts at Texas, has been in this situation, knows what the limelight is. So you add Shane Buechele and the head coach on there, that negates a lot of that, nervousness or trying to keep a team even keeled.
All right, so we shift over to the NFL side of things to finish up today's segment with Rolf Michaels from WagerTalk.com. And in general here, Rolf, again, as I mentioned about we've got 30 of the 32 teams that have played a quarter of the games that they're going to play. Jets and 49ers will do that here this week after having byes last week. But we got a pretty good idea of what we're working with now. So in your estimation, what are we working with?
Well, we have some, I don't know how low of a number you can make with Miami. I see that we have some incredible defenses, with Buffalo, with the Patriots, with the Bears that are really able to take over games. And, it's a season where, the funny thing is, we were the Browns after that Rams game were like a laughing stock. And lo and behold, 6 days later, they're in first place in their division, and all the talk stops. So, even though we're 3 or 4 games in, we're still getting as much overreaction as we have, the first 2 weeks. I bring up the Browns just because out here in Vegas, there was more money written on the Browns to win the Super Bowl on every team except the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears had the most money. The Browns had the second most money. So people were in love with the Browns, and I think how the Browns go really affects a lot of things because so many people are so invested in the Browns. With that said, it's the year of quarterback injuries. It's the year of a lot of young quarterbacks. And we're seeing that, like college football, like Trevor Lawrence, like Tua, the kids learn how to play at such a young age now. They're going to quarterback camps at such a young age that they're ready to play as a true freshman. And that also translates to the NFL. We see Daniel Jones is ready to play. We see Kyler Murray is doing fine. At Carolina, people don't remember, Cam Newton goes down, Carolina is done, there's no hope. Well, let's remember that quarterback at Carolina is the same quarterback that beat out Kyler Murray in college, and that's why Kyler Murray transferred to Oklahoma. So we're seeing quarterbacks that know how to play. It translates from college to the pros. But also, I think we also see with the Washington Redskins, I've heard this numerous times, Dwayne Haskins only played, 12 games in college football. He was not ready to play. I think the experience in college football, and there's a lot of head coaches that only want quarterbacks that have been multi-year starters because they have the experience under the belt, that it holds true.
Well, as we look at week 5 here, I think it's interesting that 8 of the 15 games have lines of 3.5 or lower, 3 games with double-digit favorites. Those are New England on the road at Washington, Philadelphia at home against the Jets, Chiefs at home against the Colts on Sunday Night Football. Then we got some games in that dead zone, 4.5, 5.5. We got a game that's almost a touchdown with Denver and the Chargers. But this is one of those weeks in the NFL here where you get a lot of games hovering around key numbers with a hook. And this is one where, people talk all the time about betting numbers and not teams. And I don't fully subscribe to that theory, especially with such a dramatic difference in coaching and scheme and, just overall talent level with some of these quarterbacks in the NFL. But the number is probably going to be very important here this week, it would appear.
Can I tell you something, Adam? You talk about 4 and 5 being dead numbers. I tweeted this out. Someone had asked me to look it up, so I did it, and I haven't tweeted it yet, but I will. Since 2000, the 5 only happened 3.4% of the time. A team won by 5. So that, the 1, the 2, and the 4 were all more than that. But since they moved the extra point line back in 2015, the 5 has hit 4.6% of the time. That's more than the 1, the 2, or the 4 have hit. So with the extra point getting moved back, the 5 is now in play. It's no longer a dead number. Again, it's landed more times. It's occurred more times than the 1, the 2, or the 4-point final score in the NFL in the last couple of years.
Well, it's definitely eye-opening. And, we knew that there would be some sort of impact with the extra point move back. And quite frankly, kicking in the NFL has probably never been worse than it has been here this season or over the last couple of seasons. But that is extremely interesting. So, I guess, really no single-digit number of, 7 or lower is a dead number anymore.
9 is the lowest number at 1.7%. So since, there's been 1,117 games. This was before last week's games since 2015. And, 4.3% fell on the 10, 9.2% fell on the 7, and 15.0% fell on the 3. So the 3 and the 7 are down just a little bit from 2000. But the 9 is, again, only 1.7%. Almost 3 times more times did a number fall on 5 than fell on 9.
Very interesting, to say the least. And we got a game here that's, kind of hovering around that 4.5, 5 range over in London, where the Chicago Bears, 4.5-point favorite against the Oakland Raiders. Will be Chase Daniel at quarterback, which, quite frankly, could be an upgrade for Chicago. But over in London, I mean, these games are always tricky. Raiders have been there the last 2 years. They've also played a game in Mexico City. The Bears haven't been there since 2011. So how much does that change the handicap for you, taking it from, a pure neutral site handicap to the Bears aren't as experienced going over there?
Well, I went back and looked, and the teams that are there for a second time are up a little bit. But, Oakland was there in 2014, like you said, and then they were there in 2018. But this is a new stadium. The stadium wasn't ready last year. It was going to be. So, again, you are talking about a brand-new stadium, a new setting, a new locker room. Yes, and I don't know if they left on Monday last year. They left right from Indy this year, so they're there already. While Chicago's going later in the week, that's a unique dynamic. I will say that going back and looking at my London chart, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, the outright winner of the game has covered 14 of the last 15 games. The only game that the outright winner has not covered was last year when the Chargers were laying 7 to Tennessee, and they won that game 20-19. Tennessee came down and I think tried the 2-point conversion, if I'm not mistaken, or there was an issue late in the game where he got a lot of flack for making a call. So, but again, that's the situation in most of the NFL. I look at it and, you look at the quotes from Khalil Mack, and he is like, I can't lie, this is a big game. I haven't looked forward to any game in my NFL career besides my opening game more than this game. So I think you're going to have a fired up Bears defense, to me, that is just elite. Miami's. I'm thinking of bad teams, and Miami's popping up in my head. Oakland's secondary has not been good. They haven't gotten picks. They haven't gotten sacks. The Bears are off a huge division rivalry game, but I agree with you. I don't think it's a drop-off in quarterback. It didn't change my line in the game at all. And I think the Bears defense is just by far the best unit on the field and can contain this game, especially with a focused and fired up Mac.
Yeah, and also for Oakland, too. I mean, a good win over Indianapolis, I think that was just kind of a one-off type thing for Indianapolis, where they're dealing with so many injuries on both sides of the ball. I think that maybe says a little bit more about Indianapolis's current roster and all the injuries that they're dealing with than it says about the Raiders. So I don't want to give Oakland too much for that win. And also, they went home last week between games, which was kind of surprising when you talk about the fact that, they have so many road games and also this home game in London. I guess it makes sense that they went back home, and maybe it worked out for them in that instance. But playing a third straight game away from home, you do kind of worry about that situation as well.
Yeah, and then they have a bye, and then they have 2 more road games. So, they were home week 2, and then they're not home until, October, whatever, against Detroit. I agree with you. You look at the Colts, and no T.Y. Hilton, and they were missing 3 starters that were just an integral part. I mean, you can miss 3 starters and have a decent team, and you can miss the starters the Colts had. And I just think maybe in my mind, I upgraded Indy a little too much, thinking, well, Jacoby Brissett can be good enough to win. And, we're seeing that they go into Tennessee and win. Tennessee's been up and down. They only had 288 yards. And then Atlanta, we've seen Atlanta struggle. So the Atlanta win, in a game that they got outgained. They've been outgained against the Chargers. They've been outgained against Atlanta. They've been outgained against Oakland. So in my mind, maybe down a notch or two, but T.Y. Hilton, again, was a huge part of that offense that was missing this past week.
Well, and maybe the best thing about this game is that Vontaze Burfict won't be able to play in it because that guy's either going to kill someone on the field or kill someone off the field at some point in time. So definitely a good thing that he won't be involved here in this one for the Oakland Raiders. One other game I want to touch on with you here, Rolf. AFC South versus NFC South game here, 457, 458, Jacksonville and Carolina. And I just talked in the previous segment with, some thoughts on Cincinnati blowing out Marshall and the big win for SMU over South Florida. I don't think that Gardner Minshew comeback and what Jacksonville did in that game at Denver is getting nearly enough respect. And I understand Carolina's looked very good with Kyle Allen, and I understand that they're a different-looking team with Kyle Allen, probably deserving of the 3.5-point favorite role here. But, man, you got to give Jacksonville a lot of credit for that comeback win last week. And so far, I don't think the market has.
I couldn't agree with you more. I was flicking through, and all of a sudden, I watched the end of that game, and yeah, you could say Denver's not a very good team, but Minshew's numbers weren't great, 19 of 33, but he's not afraid to throw the ball downfield. He completed passes of 17 or more yards to 6 different receivers. That just shows you he is working through his progressions. Oftentimes you see a young quarterback come in and they target the number 1 and number 2 receiver half the time because they're afraid to stand in the pocket. They're afraid to go through your possessions. Again, Westbrook and Clark each had 5 carries, each had 5 receptions. Fournette caught a long pass. Cole did. O'Shaughnessy did. Conley did. It shows me that he's an experienced quarterback. Yeah, you can make fun of air raid quarterbacks, but we've seen some damn good ones come through the system now where, in that Mike Leach system when he was at Washington State, you make those progressions very fast. You, boom, a 3-step drop, take a look, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I think that helps him so much right now being able to find the open receiver. And, hey, if this is the rebirth to Leonard Fournette with 225 yards, there's a lot of quarterbacks who are going to win games no matter who you are. If you have a running back that can rush for 225 yards on the road against a very good Denver defense. So, I completely agree. Let me throw out a number 2, Adam, that, our listeners have to pay attention to. NFL road teams so far this year, if you just bet every road team this season, you are 41, 20, and 2, 67.2% against the spread. So, is home field less important? Is it just because, a lot of bad home teams have played? I don't know. We'll have to see if that continues. But, we've seen road teams be about 51 or 52% the last few years. But this is crazy. Through a quarter of the season, 67.2% for the road team. I think the Jags are a team now that they go on the road in the second of back-to-back. People have enough film where I think the Panthers can slow Fournette. It's a game that with the 2 young quarterbacks that are both 3-0 as starters, I actually like the under in this game. I think we're going to see more rushing than passing. I think we see very good defensive fronts. And, imagine how good Jacksonville's going to be if they get a happy Ramsey back in the secondary. I don't know if that'll happen or not, but, he'll just add another level to that defensive prowess.
One thing I will be watching closely, and I don't know if I'm going to take Jacksonville this week. I've barely scratched the surface on the NFL card to this point, but Christian McCaffrey, 37 touches last week, 27 touches the week before. We knew he would have a high workload with Cam Newton out of the equation, but 51 of those 64 touches coming on the ground. This is a guy, you kind of worry about him in the NFL we saw the sheer usage numbers at Stanford and eventually kind of wore him down a little bit. That's something I worry about with Carolina here going forward. Again, I don't know if it'll be part of the deciding factor for me to take Jacksonville this week, but that is something on my radar here where this is a really unique scenario. I mean, outside of maybe Chris Carson with Seattle, you don't see guys get that level of a workload in the NFL anymore because of all the passing and spreading it around to a bunch of different guys. So that is something to watch with Carolina. Again, I don't know if it's a this week thing, but as we go forward here, he's getting hit a lot, let alone, blitz pickups and stuff like that. So that is something I'm watching closely here with Carolina, where with Kyle Allen, I mean, McCaffrey has to be your most important offensive player. He's had a lot of mileage already so far this year.
Well, as you talked, I just brought up the numbers. McCaffrey has had 86 attempts rushing. Plus, we know what he catches as well. Nick Chubb is number 2 with 78. Derrick Henry with 78. Kieran Johnson with 74. And Zeke with 73. Fournette 72. Max 72. Cook 71. What's the difference? You look at Chubb, Henry, Fournette, Mack, Elliott. Those guys are all huge. Those are big running backs when you look at them. And then again, McCaffrey, eight attempts clear of all of them with his size. Plus, again, like you mentioned, picking up the blitz blocks and the receptions he gets.
Yeah, just something to watch. Just some food for thought for listeners out there that, keep in mind. I mean, it's a guy that he takes a lot of punishment. I mean, he's 12th in the NFL in receptions. He's a running back. So just keep that in mind here where, he's a guy that takes on a lot of workload for that Carolina team. Rolf Michaels, professional handicapper over at wagertalk.com. What's going on over there right now, man?
Well, again, there's a ton of college football information, guys. Take advantage. My power ratings are updated every Sunday morning. I list them alphabetically and by conference. The Gridiron Guide is up every Sunday morning. The Gridiron Guide is a football newsletter that is 1 page per game. It gives you the logs for ATS and over-under lines, yards, turnovers, quarter-by-quarter scoring, and gives you 15 ATS and 15 over-under categories. A great tool to have if you want to watch, look how your team's progressed. My college football stat sheets go up every week, 1-page schedules. If you're looking for a college football schedule to print out, I'm old school, Adam. I still have to print my college football schedule out. So I make a 1-page schedule. I put the opening lines from the circa in, sides and totals. So then at the end of the week, at a glance, as I'm writing notes on these games, I can see exactly how much the game has moved. Again, something old school that I enjoy still writing. I know I'm the minority out there, but ton of great information, wagertalk.com, and then go to the Ralph Michaels page.
Make sure you follow Ralph on Twitter as well, at CalSportsLV. Ralph Michaels, wagertalk.com. Appreciate your time and all of your efforts here on today's segment. We'll talk to you again next week.
Always appreciate it, Adam. Thank you.